Hey, senior English students. I'm going to go ahead and read the very end of The Glass Castle to you. So, this will be our last reading of this book, and this will take us into spring break. So, kind of sad. Um, we end with part 5, Thanksgiving. I want you to be thinking about that. Why do you think Jeanette? I mean, there's a couple reasons. Like, obviously, this part of the book is about the holiday Thanksgiving, but think about what Thanksgiving means. So while I'm reading, make sure that you're thinking about that big question. And also, one more thing. I want you to be thinking about how our experiences shape who we are and how, and I think you'll probably remember this from the beginning of this book, which was something I posed to you when I said, what happened isn't what we remember becomes what happened. So, we talked a lot about that at the beginning of the book, and I think some people were confused by it. But now that we've read the book, I think you can kind of connect that a little more. This big idea that what happened is not what we remember. What we remember is what becomes what happened. So, we talked about this before. Like, you're talking to your parents and you're like, oh, yeah, remember when that happened? That was crazy. And your mom and dad are like, it didn't happen like that. And you're like, yeah, it did. And they're like, no, it didn't. How we remember events shapes that event for us. And so the way I remember something and the way my husband remembers it may be very different because how we remember it kind of shapes our memories. I know that's kind of hard to understand, but it's true because how Jeanette remembers stuff and how Rosemary remembers stuff is very different, right? So we are going to be at 285. So be thinking about what is Thanksgiving. Be thinking about the idea that what we remember becomes what happened. And also be thinking about how things in our lives shape the person we become. I was standing on the platform with my second husband, John. A whistle sounded in the distance, red lights flashed, and a bell clanged as the gates were lowered across the roadway. The whistle sounded again, and then the train appeared around the bend through the trees and rumbled towards the station, its massive twin headlights pale in the bright November afternoon. The train eased to a stop. The electric engines hummed and vibrated, and after a long pause, the doors opened. Passengers spilled out, carrying their folded newspapers and canvases, weekend bags, and brightly colored coats. Through the crowd, I saw Mom and Lori getting out at the back of the train, and I waved. It had been 5 years since Dad died. I had seen Mom only sporadically since then, and she'd never met John nor been to the old country farmhouse we had bought the year before. It had been John's idea to invite her and Lori and Brian out to the house for Thanksgiving, the first Walls family get together since Dad's funeral. Mom broke into a huge smile and started hurrying towards us. Instead of an overcoat, she was wearing what looked to be 4 sweaters and a shawl, a pair of corduroy trousers, and some old sneakers. She carried bulky shopping bags in both hands. Lori, behind her, wore a black cape and a black fedora. They made quite a pair. Mom hugged me. Her long hair was mostly gray, but her cheeks were rosy and her eyes as bright as ever. Lori then hugged me and I introduced John. Excuse my attire, Mom said, but I plan to change out of my comfy shoes into some more dress shoes for dinner. She reached into one of her shopping bags and pulled out a pair of banged up penny loafers. The winding road back to the house led under stone bridges through woods and villages and past marsh ponds where swans floated on a mirror like water. Most of the leaves had fallen, and gusts of wind sent them spiraling along the roadside. Through the thickets of bare trees, you could see the houses that were invisible during the summer. As he drove, John told Mom and Lori about the area, about the duck farms and the flower farms, and the Indian origin of our town's name. Sitting beside him, I studied his profile and couldn't helped smiling. John wrote for books and magazine articles. Like me, he had moved around a lot while growing up, but his mother had raised him in an Appalachian village in Tennessee, about 100 miles southwest of Welch. So you could say our families hailed from the same neck of the woods. I had never met a man I would rather spend more time with. I loved him for all sorts of reasons. He cooked without recipes. He wrote nonstop nonsense poems for his nieces. His large, warm family had accepted me as one of their own. And when I showed him my scar, he said it was interesting. He used the word textured. He said smooth was boring, but textured was interesting. And the scar meant that I was stronger than whatever it was that had tried to hurt me. We pulled into the drive. Jessica, John's 15-year-old daughter from his first marriage, came out of the house, along with Brian and his 8-year-old daughter Veronica and their bull mastiff Charlie. Brian hadn't seen much of Mom since Dad's funeral either. He hugged her and immediately started ribbing her about her plucked from the dumpster present she had bought for everyone in the shopping bags. Rusted silverware, old books and magazines, a few pair of fine bone china from the 20s with only minor chips. Brian had become a decorated sergeant detective, supervising a special unit that investigated organized crime. He and his wife had split around the time Eric and I did, but he had consoled himself by buying and renovating a wreck of a townhouse in Brooklyn. He put his new wiring and plumbing, a new firebox, reinforced floor joints, and a new porch all on his own. It was the second time he had taken on a true dump and restored it to perfection. Also, at least 2 women were after him to marry them. He was doing pretty darn well. We showed Mom and Lori the gardens, which were ready for winter. John and I had done all the work ourselves. Raked the leaves and shredded them into the chipper, cut back the dead perennials and mulched the beds, shoved compost into the vegetable garden and tilled it, and dug up the daffodil bulbs and stored them in a bucket of sand in the basement. John had also split and stacked wood from dead maple we had cut down and climbed up on the roof to replace some rotted cedar shingles. Mom nodded at all our preparations. She had always appreciated self-sufficiency. She admitted the wisteria that wrapped around the potting shed. She admired the wisteria that had wrapped around the potting shed, the triumphant vine on the arbor, and the big grove of bamboo in the back. When she saw the pool, an impulse seized her, and she ran out onto the green plastic cover to test its strength. Charlie, the dog, lopping after her. The cover sagged underneath them, and she fell down, shrieking with laughter. John and Brian had to help her off as Brian's daughter, Veronica, who hadn't seen Mom since she was a toddler, stared wide-eyed. "Grandma Walls is different from your other grandmas," I told her. "Way different," Veronica said. John's daughter, Jessica, turned to me and said, "But she laughs just like you do." I showed Mom and Lori the house. I still went into the office in the city once a week, but this was where John and I lived and worked, our home, the first home I had ever owned. Lori and Mom admired the wide plank floorboards, the big fireplaces, the ceiling beams made from locust posts, the gouge marks from the axe that had felled them. Mom's eye settled on an Egyptian couch we had bought at a flea market. It had carved legs and wooden backrest inlaid with mother-of-pearl triangles. She nodded in approval. "Every household," she said, "needs one piece of furniture in really bad taste." The kitchen was filled with the smell of roasting turkey that John had prepared, with the stuffing of sausage and mushrooms and walnuts and apples and spiced breadcrumbs. He also made creamed onions, wild rice, cranberry sauce, and squash casserole. I'd baked 3 pies with apples from the nearby orchard. "Bonanza!" Brian shouted. "Feast time," I said to him. He looked at the dishes. I knew what he was thinking, what he thought every time he saw a spread like that one. He shook his head and said, "You know, it's really not that hard to put food on a table if that's what you decide to do." Now, no recommendations, Lori told him. After we sat down at the dinner, Mom told us her good news. She had been a squatting for almost 15 years, and the city had decided to sell the apartments to her and the other squatters for $1 apiece. She couldn't accept our invitation to stay a while, she said, because she had to get back for the board meeting for the squatters. Mom also said she had been in touch with Maureen, who was living in California, and that our kid sister, whom I hadn't spoken to since she left New York City, was thinking of coming back for a visit. We started talking about some of Dad's great escapades, letting me pet the cheetah, taking us demon hunting, and giving us a star for Christmas. We should drink a toast to Rex, John said. Mom stared at the ceiling, miming perplexed thoughts. I've got it. She held up her glass. Life with your father was never boring. We raised our glass. I could almost hear Dad chuckling at Mom's comment in a way he always did when he was truly enjoying something. It had grown dark outside. A wind picked up, rattling the windows, and the candle flame suddenly shifted, dancing along the border between turbulence and order. What a great book. So I think at the end of the day, how she ends that book of this idea of the line between turbulence and order. You guys we talked about it in the book, that like a candle, when you look at a flame, it's the in-between. It's that in-between part between the flame and the air. It's that waving part. And I think that they lived in that part for most of their lives. That boundary between turbulence, the turbulence of fire, and the order of air. They lived in a constant state of in-between. I really hope you enjoyed this book. It took me a long time to find something that I felt like my seniors could identify with. And I really, really like this book a lot. And I told you would like it too. So we have a lot to discuss when we get back to school. A lot of things that we'll go through. Obviously, we'll watch the movie because you have to see Woody Harrelson's depiction of Rex. And I want to see your thoughts on how he depicts Rex versus what you've been imagining in your head. I hope to be able to watch that movie together in room 208 soon. Until then, I miss you guys so much. I'm around, okay? I'm only over on Santa Fe Trail. If you need anything, email me. I'm pretty lost without seeing you guys every day, so keep me posted on your life during spring break, and we'll just see how things go from there. Stay safe, stay healthy. I will see you soon. Have a good evening.